St. Petersburg, a large city in southern Florida. Why is it called this way, and how was it created? The city and its name come from an astonishing combination of events involving a prominent Russian immigrant, his explorations, his encounters with many other notable individuals, and the first railroad on Pinellas Peninsula.
Peter Demens was a Russian nobleman. He was born in 1850 in a village near the city of Novgorod. Orphaned at a young age, he moved into an estate owned by his uncle near the city of Vesyegonsk. He attended school in St. Petersburg, served in the National Guards, and reached the rank of captain. He married a young woman named Raisa Borisenko and left the National Guards in 1870 to live in his estate. In 1872, he was elected to the government of Vesyegonsk province. In 1880, multiple government officials from Vesyegonsk County were charged with malfeasance and embezzlement. Then, early the next year, the Tsar, the progressive Alexander II, was assassinated. Demens disliked the new Tsar, the corruption in his government, and the overall political climate of Russia. He decided to leave the country, and in June of 1881, boarded a ship headed for America.
Demens wanted to avoid confusion with his long Russian name, so he decided to shorten it to Demens. Demens arrived in New York, and a day later headed for Jacksonville, where one of his relatives lived. Demens did not get along with his relative well and left Jacksonville soon after arriving. I found out that neither agriculture nor stock raising, in the sense in which I knew them, existed in Florida, especially in its southern part, Demens wrote, and that the only plant raised here, with intermittent success, is the orange tree. I found that in southern Florida there exists quite a profitable business, the sawmill industry, which does not require any special knowledge nor significant capital, and it pays itself quite well. Demens later described the experience of visiting a sawmill. On 2 or 3 heavy timbers stood a tiny, simple machine. The logs quickly disappear, one after the other. In about 10 minutes, a giant log, 3 feet in diameter, is turned into a wonderful smooth board, of such quality which I had never seen before. 6 or 7 people, as it turns out, could produce more boards incomparably better in one day than a greater number of Russians in a month. He ended up settling in the city of Longwood, where he bought an 80-acre orange grove and 1/3 interest in a sawmill. In 1883, he was able to buy out his partners at the sawmill, to which he added a woodworking plant, creating the Peter Demens Company. One of his customers, the Orange Belt Railway Company, who ordered railroad ties, had bankrupt. Instead of payment, they presented the railroad to Demens. The Orange Belt was a narrow-gauge railroad which was to run from Sanford to the southern edge of Lake Apopka. Demens took over the railroad project. He partnered with A.M. Taylor, who owned a general store in Longwood, Joseph Henshin, a Swedish immigrant, and Henry Sweetapple, a Canadian. The company continued the railroad project, building a Russian-style station in every town along the route. The company needed funds, so Demens sold bonds. The railroad was also sponsored by 2 prominent businessmen, Herman Armour and Anthony Drexel.
Demens tried his best to impress these 2 men. "These are big fish. We need to catch them," he said to one of his railroad workers. Every night, he had the worker interrupt his poker game with Armour to tell him that his private rail car was ready. Then, Demens would leave the game, saying that he had urgent business on the railroad. When it was time for Demens to demonstrate the railroad to his sponsors, the train traveled at 40 miles an hour, a speed that would not be achieved on the Orange Belt for a very long time.
When the tracks reached their planned end, Demens wanted to name the town St. Petersburg, after what was then the capital of Russia. However, James Spear, who donated the land for the new town, insisted that it would be named Oakland. Demens became Oakland's first mayor. Demens wanted to continue the railroad to Tampa Bay. After many unsuccessful attempts at finding a property owner willing to donate land on the bay, Demens' partner Sweetapple was able to find one. This landowner was John Constantine Williams, son of the first mayor of Detroit. Williams preferred to be called General, though he never carried that rank. In his old age, Williams was closely assisted by his wife Sarah. Sarah Williams was a Canadian, like Sweetapple. They were able to get along, and John Williams allowed for his land to be used for the town. In 1886, a disaster occurred for the railroad. Angry creditors who had not been paid back on time arrived in Oakland and chained the locomotives to the rails in protest. Upon seeing this, Demens' partner Sweetapple died of a stroke.
Before the railroad even reached the city, E.R. Ward, a local shop owner, was chosen as the postmaster. However, a post office could not be established before the town was named. Ward's wife, the future postmistress, wanted to name the town Wardsville, after their family. However, Williams wanted to name the town after one of the original investors in the railroad, either Demens, Henshin, Sweetapple, or Taylor. Ward traveled to the Orange Belt headquarters in Oakland to settle the matter. However, he only found Henshin there. Henshin, who wanted to avoid quarreling over who the town should be named after, and who knew that Demens wanted to name Oakland St. Petersburg, decided to give the town that name.
The new town's name, St. Petersburg, was important to Demens for several reasons. First of all, it shared its name with the capital of Demens' home country, Russia. He spent half his youth there, and it was one of his favorite towns. However, this was not the only reason. The town was named after Saint Peter, Peter Demens' patron saint. So, in a way, we can say that the town was named after Peter Demens himself.
When the tracks had been laid to the city, a railroad pier was built so that goods could be loaded off of ships right onto trains. Knowing that a coastal town would have tourism, Demens built a bathhouse on the pier and a hotel, which was named the Detroit, after Williams' birthplace. When Demens had completed his railroad, it was the longest narrow gauge to be built. The ride was bumpy, slow, and described as a comic strip railroad. Breakdowns and derailings were common, and the railroad itself did not bring much profit. Demens was forced to sell the railroad and give away all the money his company had to creditors.
We all know that he was a very hard-working person, and he was working 12, 14 hours a day, and obviously this was quite difficult on him. Plus, for him, as a person who came from Northern Europe, Florida's heat, summer, and humidity really deteriorated his health, and obviously he did not really like the situation as his business was going along. So after much ado, in 1889, he was living in St. Petersburg, the very small town in Florida which he founded, and moved to North Carolina.
In North Carolina, Demens settled in the city of Asheville, where he continued his trade of building. His company built the courthouse and post office of Statesville, which today serves as the town's city hall.
I live in this wonderful old house that Peter Demens built in 1890. It's a big house. It's got 10,000 square feet, and the woods are oak, walnut, cherry, and mahogany. And Demens did a beautiful job, a masterful job. Architects have called it three different things. They've called it Classic Victorian, Russian Byzantine, and Steamboat Gothic. The Steamboat Gothic is, if you see the tower there with the porthole windows, it looks like a steamboat. And so it's a lovely, lovely, lovely house, and it has been a nurturing place for me for 42 years now.
After Demens left St. Petersburg, the city grew. St. Petersburg's wide avenues, previously muddy and impassable, were paved. The Hotel Detroit was expanded, and the railroad was switched to standard gauge. Demens wanted to move to San Francisco, where many other Russian immigrants lived. Along the way, the Demens family, which now included 6 children, spent the night in Los Angeles. They liked the city so much, they decided to stay. In Los Angeles, Demens became a writer and journalist, writing many articles for the Russian monthly Herald of Europe. Demens missed the orange trees he grew in Florida. He moved into a ranch near Alta Loma, where he grew oranges and wrote. After the next Tsar, Nikolai II, came to power, Demens started visiting Russia to meet up with old friends from the National Guard and to publish books and memoirs that he wrote. Demens died at his ranch in 1919 at the age of 69.
Demens is remembered by many monuments and places where he lived and worked. He also left behind his writing, chronicling the life of a talented individual, exploring, encountering, and exchanging his ideas.